Power scaling in Bleach is often negatively received even among the Bleach fandom. We usually hear statements like, it has illogical / out of nowhere power-ups that come with a crazy increase in power, or characters being much weaker or stronger than they should be depending on what the plot needs to progress, which makes the scaling in general inconsistent. And finally, Kubo retconning some of the established power system rules later in the story to, again, make characters power up. And in my opinion, people believe in these statements because they believe in several other fallacies that they assume are correct because of the way they interpreted the show. But the credibility for these statements come from repetition by those who were recited without understanding Bleach and some actual inconsistencies in the anime adaptation for the most part rather than facts and logic. And the first fallacy is treating Bleach's power system like that of Dragon Ball, where power levels is the most important aspect of it, which consequently leads to the conclusion that if character A has a higher power level than character B, and character B has a higher power level than character C, this means character B can beat character C at any given moment, and character A can beat both B and C in addition to the ability to negate their hacks, because it all comes down to power levels. And first of all, I don't know why for some reason people are trying to find any common ground between Dragon Ball and Bleach. These two animes have absolutely nothing in common as far as I'm concerned. It is no secret that Kubo was inspired by Akira Toriyama, which eventually led to him making Bleach. But unlike in Bleach, power levels might work in Dragon Ball because that's how the author created his work. And even that is still debatable among the Dragon Ball fandom to this day. More often than not, the power levels guide does not make any sense, hence why you shouldn't apply them to other animes, especially Bleach, because it is actually the complete opposite of that. The fights barely focus on the one metric that is the overall power level of the character. Take for example when Soul Society arc Uryu won against Mayuri, yet couldn't beat Sazail who easily lost to Mayuri. Another example, which is hypothetical, is if Lily fought against Yamamoto, how exactly is Yamamoto supposed to win? Despite clearly having an overall higher power level, he cannot kill him. On the flip side, Nanao, who couldn't stand straight in Yamamoto's presence, has a perfect counter to Lily. So again, just because Yamamoto can beat Nanao and Nanao can beat Lily, doesn't necessarily mean that Yamamoto can beat him too. In conclusion, you shouldn't be looking at the power scale with this one-dimensional way of thinking, as there are a lot of other factors that contribute to how a fight should end, which is actually the more realistic approach to making a 1v1 match. Take for example the game of chess. It follows a rating ladder called the ELO rating, where the more you win, the more ELO points you gain, which is indicative of your playing strength. However, most of the time, a 2700 rated player will beat a 2650 rated player, but still lose to, say, a 2600 rated player that lost to the 2650 rated player. What decides who will win in these matches is not the ratings, but rather a combination of other factors. Of course, having a higher rating, or in our case, a higher power level, can indicate higher winning odds, but ultimately, it is not the decisive factor. Hence why I shouldn't jump into conclusions about who would win in a fight between two characters only based on how strong they are and disregarding every other aspect. Apply this logic to one of the fights that is usually used to point out how the scaling in Bleach doesn't work, like the Zaraki vs Ichigo in the Soul Society arc. It is really funny when people ask how did Ichigo beat Zaraki in that fight when he was still weak. Meanwhile, Ichigo struggled so much against Gremjo and Noitora that Zaraki barely won against. Firstly, this literally never happened. Ichigo did not beat Zaraki. Both of them fell to the ground after the fight came to an end, with Ichigo receiving far worse wounds. The best you can say about that fight is that it was a draw. As for the reasoning, although it took so much time to be revealed, but Zaraki subconsciously limits his power to be relative to that of his opponents, which explains why he was relative to Ichigo. Heck, he was even cooking Ichigo. And I guess it is because Zaraki was so much stronger that it takes more than him suppressing himself to match Ichigo's powers at that time. But since White trained Ichigo and Old Man Zangetsu momentarily stopped suppressing him, you can safely assume that this was the moment where he nearly surpassed the suppressed Zaraki, resulting in a draw. And after that fight, specifically in the Ranker Saga, it took Ichigo some time to be able to reach back his higher peaks of powers in the Soul Society arc, as not only did Old Man Zangetsu go back to suppressing Ichigo as usual, but Ichigo used the combat past that acted as a seal and controls his spiritual powers to access his soul reaper powers, which is yet another layer of suppression, in addition to Ichigo rejecting White all along the Ranker Saga, and this internal conflict clearly affected Ichigo in battle, both mentally and physically. And as for Zaraki, he again brought down his power levels to match those of Noitora, and that's why he struggled a bit. Now, some of you might ask, if he limits himself to be relative to his opponent, which results in a draw, why did he win against Noitora but not Ichigo? Zaraki fights for satisfaction. On one hand, he wants to win, but on the other hand, he wants to fight as long as possible for maximum satisfaction. So, in a nutshell, he wants to have the fight of his life by winning against a strong opponent. And if that opponent showed weakness, Zaraki would lose the desire to continue fighting, which is what happened in the fight against Ichigo up until Ichigo unleashed some of his hidden potential and forced a draw with Zaraki. On the flip side though, Zaraki limited himself to be relative to Noitora. Noitora kept powering up and Zaraki slowly unleashed more of his suppressed potential to keep up with Noitora and continue fighting until it got to a point where Noitora was the one who couldn't keep up. So it is not like when Zaraki brings down his strength, he cannot power up further in that fight. He literally had the power in him, but he only uses roughly whatever is going to make him win, but at the same time fight for as long as possible. However, if he fought using his full strength from the very beginning, not only does it contradict his personality, but he would have destroyed both Ichigo and Noitora without breaking a sweat. Now, moving to the second point, the hacks negation thing. This is by far the biggest and most widespread myth that I have laid my eyes on when it comes to the Bleach power scaling. Spiritual pressure in Bleach does not negate hacks. A lot of people like to bring up Aizen negating Soivon hacks in the fake Karakura Town arc, or some statements from the novels where it says that Zaraki's growing Ryatsu would eventually overpower Bargain's Respera, and that's why Aizen trapped him in Wako Mundo. Now, I know the novels are canon as Kubo supervised them, but to be honest, I don't trust everything that is in there, specifically the power scaling stuff, and for various reasons. 1. There are a lot of mistranslations as I believe they haven't been officially translated yet, and the available translations are usually interpreted in the wrong way. 2. Sometimes it feels as if the author does not really understand how fights work in Bleach, which results in really weird statements that we have to deal with its consequences to this day. I might be wrong though, and they just happen to be a mistranslation or a misinterpretation by me, but whatever. Even if you consider everything in the novels to be 100% canon, the Zaraki hypothetical feat is not a hack's negation one. Because of his overgrowing Ryatsu, I can imagine him breaking the Respera aura-like thing before it even reaches him to take effect. And even if it touches him, it is gonna result in a situation similar to that of Ichigo and Aizen back in the Society arc when Aizen prevented Ichigo's sword from hurting him even though the sword made contact because of the huge difference in spiritual pressure. Spiritual pressure in general is what powers Soul Reapers, in which explains Aizen's words, the battle between Soul Reapers is a battle of Ryatsu. Soul Reapers literally cannot die as long as they still have Ryatsu. If two Soul Reapers use the same Kido technique, but one of them possesses higher Ryatsu, the one with higher Ryatsu is going to deal much more damage, even though they both have similar levels of Kido mastery. He also never explicitly said anything about Hack's negation, nor are we 100% sure that he negated the ability. It might have been an illusion, or he prevented the ability itself from reaching him, because once it reaches him, there is no way to negate it, or else he would have negated the effect of Kami Shini no Yari by increasing his spiritual pressure again. Another example that not everybody can negate hacks via the difference in Ryatsu is when Tsukishima's Book of the End changed the outcome of Yuha's Almighty breaking Ichigo's sword, despite having a difference in power similar to that of a hydrogen bomb versus a coughing baby. So, in conclusion, the difference in power levels does not matter as much in Bleach. A character can in fact be stronger on the scale of power, but still lose in a matchup, which again does not mean that the power scale is non-existent, but it means it is just more complex. And the second fallacy is applying the power scaling rules that are used in the hypothetical versus battles between different anime universes to the Bleach verse to decide either who would win in a Bleach fight or how strong a character is in general. Don't get me started on the whole power scaling thing and how stupid it is, because a typical power scaling argument goes like this. In chapter 1047 of One Piece, Luffy makes a fist as big as Onigashima, and since Onigashima is roughly the size of your mother, this scales Luffy's destructive capabilities to hyperversal. But wait, since your dad clapped your mother's cheeks, this scales him and consequently you above Luffy to a tier where you govern over space-time and gain immunity to erectile dysfunction and pubic hair erasers. The only reason power scaling is still relevant is because of how entertaining and creative some content creators are with their matchups, and the kids who bring up how their unknown web novel character solves your verse whenever somebody mentions the word writing. The problem with power scaling is that it ignores the context of the fight and assumes that characters have a fixed power level determined on their feats with 100% output in every fight, which unsurprisingly does not make any sense. Most of power scalers, and I mean no offense to anybody, are high schoolers or people who generally didn't get any form of proper education. But when it comes to power scaling, they suddenly turn into PhD holders in quantum physics just to prove that Saitama beats Goku with the stupidest arguments known to man. The power scaling logic is already flawed enough, so of course when you try to apply it to the different anime universes, contradictions and inconsistencies will emerge. Authors do not even have power scaling in mind when writing the story, or at least the power scaling we know that measures everything in hard numbers. Authors will roughly have in the back of their minds how strong a character is relative to other characters, so speed is not measured relative to the light speed, but rather character A is faster than character B, period. But how fast are they in the exact numbers? Not even the authors know. So the lieutenants evading the negation in the Society arc, which is light, and fake Town Ichigo, who far outscaled these lieutenants yet could barely react to Gin's blade that is assumed to be 500 times the speed of sound, which is 1700 times slower than what the lieutenants easily evaded, is not actually an inconsistency. If Ichigo outscaled them, then he can evade the negation, and if he can barely react to Gin's blade, they won't be able to react at all, even if negation is considered to be faster than Gin's blade by power scaling logic. So bring up whatever inconsistencies you have, and it doesn't matter as it literally happens in every other series. And the third fallacy is, characters gain illogical amounts of power whenever convenient, and sometimes it gets to a point where Kubo retcons his own power system rules. And I think this belief in particular stems from the fact that a significant chunk of the fights in Bleach follow the one-upping formula, where characters will keep powering up until one wins. Now if you don't like it, fine, but it is a matter of preference. This doesn't mean it is illogical or bad, as one, it is in line with the power system. The whole thing is literally built upon newer forms that we already know they have, so why wouldn't they make use of them whenever needed? Two, it is not out of nowhere if it was hinted to beforehand, which is literally the case with all the power-ups that some people deem an ass-pull. Take one of the most recent and controversial ass-pulls, Nanao's Zanpakuto. From the moment both she and Shinsui were introduced, something was off that was clearly going to pay off in the future. He, unlike all captains except his friend, have dual-wielded Zanpakuto, and she, unlike all the lieutenants except for Nemo, who is an artificial soul, does not carry a Zanpakuto. And for some reason, in the past arc, he takes care of her in the squad barracks, which clearly indicates a relation that Kubo is going to develop at one point in the story, and chose it to be during the fight against Lily. It was not directly hinted to, but a space was always left to be filled later whenever Kubo decides to develop her character and fill the curiosity gap he created from the moment he introduced her. You should have always expected it coming at this point. Now, is it convenient that she literally had the perfect counter? Yes, it is. But remember that Kubo is the one that made the fight reach to a point where this convenience is needed. It is not like Lily was acting on his own that he cornered Kubo and made him come with a plot device out of the blue to save himself from being cornered. The moment Kubo came up with this fight, he already planned its outcome, hence why he drove this fight to reach this point to reveal such important plot point and develop both Shinsui and Nanao's characters. So, it was essential for the plot, it was expected, and it doesn't contradict what has already been established. But talking about contradictions, a lot of people recite the same thing over and over, that Kubo does not abide by his power system rules, that he needs to retcon it sometimes for the sake of plot progression, in which again leads to inconsistencies in the power scale. And according to them, the clearest examples are when Kubo retconned the Quincy's power system when we entered the Thousand Year Blood War arc just to make them a big enough threat, and Renji only learning half of his Bankai name, which supposedly should not happen, since he shouldn't have been able to achieve the Bankai to begin with if he was not strong enough, in which makes the explanation they gave a retcon. As for the first point, even though Kubo probably never planned the whole Quincy's power system and added new stuff when he introduced them, but this doesn't mean he contradicted or retconned what he established long ago. When Oreo was first introduced, we were only introduced to the Quincy's base mechanics that are still used even by Yuha's Stern Ritters. in addition to a couple of advanced techniques that an updated version of them is also used by Yuha's army. Now, what was entirely new is that the source of Quincy's powers is Yuha's blood. Was that planned from the very beginning? We cannot really prove nor deny it, but does it contradict anything? Absolutely not. We knew how basic Quincy fights early on, but we didn't know why do they have such abilities. In the Thousand-Year Blood War arc, the arc dedicated to the Quincy race, it totally makes sense that they will reveal the source of their powers in the said arc. Now as for the second point, the whole argument is just a misunderstanding. There's a difference between being strong enough to achieve the Bankai and being strong and experienced enough to fully utilize the Bankai. There is a baseline one needs to reach in order to achieve their Bankai and then master it with training. So Renji was in fact strong enough to achieve Bankai, but not strong enough to unleash his full powers. And Kubo made that clearly evident, by the way. As firstly, according to Byakuya, one needs 10 years to master the Bankai. So how can Renji, who has just unlocked it, use it with its full powers? Secondly, Renji's Zanpakuto is a snake-monkey hybrid creature, but when he unleashed his incomplete Bankai, first of all, it looked lame as hell, but it also only resembled the snake part, which is a clear evidence that Renji was only using half of his Bankai's power. But with that being said, there are still 2 points that seem really hard to defend, which makes Bleach's power scale look like a joke. Hence why I wanted to go over them quickly before finishing this video. 1. How did Rukia lose to a random holo in the first episode even though she is a lieutenant and has already achieved her Shikai by that point? If you're an anime only, this scene is nearly undefendable. However, the answer lies within the manga. If you notice, the scene in the manga is completely different from that of the anime. In the manga, after sustaining an injury from Rukia, the holo disappears momentarily to retreat, and then sneaks on Rukia, catching her off guard while she was monologuing with Ichigo, who was borderline suicidal after knowing that he is the reason why holos hurt the people close to him. Ichigo, being overwhelmed by guilt, asks the holo to take his life instead of hurting his loved ones. The injured Rukia, having noticed that, got to react as physically preventing Ichigo from getting himself killed, in which caused her an even worse injury that immobilized her, and then the rest is history. Now, compare that to the anime version and tell me what do you think. 2. How did Soul Society arc Ichigo one-shot 3 lieutenants including Sasakibi, who is a captain level character? Captain level is a loose term that shouldn't be relevant in power scaling debates, because Soul Society Aizen was captain level, Byakuya was captain level, and Ikako is also captain level. Captain's strength varies so much that the term captain level should not be used to indicate their strength. As for Sasakibi, I believe he is a low-tier captain. He also doesn't seem to have grown much in strength in the period he was Yamamoto's lieutenant, and injuring Yamamoto in a training is not really that big of a deal anyway. The scene was also more of a speed show-off rather than a strength feat. Ichigo blitzed them before they could do anything, and then immediately clashed with Byakuya, who is clearly stronger than Sasakibi, putting an insane fight and showing even more impressive speed feats. Honestly, I don't know why people still bring up this scene. This version of Ichigo clearly beats Bankai Sasakibi, especially speed-wise. And finally, if there is still something that I haven't covered, kindly comment it down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.